The call came at 2:03 a.m. That kind of time doesn't belong to normal life. It belongs to house fires, car crashes, and the moment your body knows the world is about to tilt before your mind catches up. I blinked at my phone screen, still foggy with sleep, and saw Mark. My brother. The same brother who used to stand between me and every bully in middle school. The same brother who told me, no matter what happens, you'll never be alone. The same brother who, a year earlier, had looked me in the eye and sided with his wife after she stole my money, like I was a stranger begging at their door, not his sister. My throat went tight as I answered. Mark? My voice came out small, like I was 16 again. On the other end, his breathing sounded wrong, thin, shaky, like he was trying not to fall apart in front of me. I'm at the hospital, he whispered. I sat straight up, my heart slamming hard enough to make my ears ring. What happened? Are you hurt? Where are you? A pause, then his voice cracked. I finally called the police. Those words didn't make sense at first. My brain tried to grab onto something safer, something logical. An accident, a misunderstanding, anything except the truth that had been circling my life for years, like a shadow. But the truth didn't soften. The last time I'd seen Mark up close, he looked smaller. Not physically, just like someone had been folding him inward, day by day, until there wasn't much left but compliance. And I hated myself for leaving, for telling myself I had to protect my own peace, for pretending that if I closed the door on that house, the toxic air inside it would stop existing. I swung my legs off of the bed so fast I nearly tripped. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my keys. In the dark hallway, I caught my reflection in a mirror. Messy hair, wide eyes, a face that looked like it had already started grieving. As I drove, streetlights strobing across my windshield, one memory kept replaying like a warning siren. That envelope, the drawer, the missing cash, and Sarah's brand new designer purse sitting on the coffee table like a trophy, while Mark told me I should have been more careful. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, swallowing the bitter taste rising in my throat. Because deep down I already knew this wasn't just a hospital call. This was the moment my brother's life, and mine, was going to split into before and after. I'm Victoria. I'm 32 now, but this story didn't begin with that 2 a.m. phone call. It began 3 years earlier, when I lost my job and pride became a luxury I couldn't afford. I used to be a marketing coordinator at a small startup. I loved the pace, the creativity, the feeling that I was building something. Then the economy dipped, investors pulled back, and one Monday morning, we all got called into a meeting where the CEO's hands were shaking around a printed script he didn't even need. The company was done. Our paychecks were done. Our health insurance was done. At first, I told myself I'd rebound fast. I made spreadsheets, applied to everything, tweaked my resume until it felt like a lie, took odd jobs, tried freelancing. But in my city, rent didn't care about hope. My savings thinned out like paper rubbed between fingers. I remember the day I gave up my apartment. I stood in that empty living room, listening to my footsteps echo, staring at the faint rectangle on the wall where my couch used to be. It felt like failure had a sound. Hollow, metallic, final. That's when Mark stepped in. My brother is 35, and for most of my life, he's been the steady thing. Growing up, he was the one who waited outside my classroom after a bad day, the one who fixed my bike chain, the one who knew when I was lying because he'd tilt his head and say gently, "Tell me the real story." And after our parents died 10 years ago, car accident, sudden, brutal, the kind of grief that burns clean through you, Mark became more than a brother. He became my only family. So when he said, "Vic, just come stay with us. We have the space. You'll get back on your feet," I cried so hard I couldn't speak. He and his wife, Sarah, 34, polished, charming in public, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and brought the perfect dish to potlucks, had a spare room. They insisted it was no trouble. And in the beginning, it really did feel okay. Mark and I stayed up late the first week, sitting at their kitchen island with mugs of tea, laughing about old stories. He asked about my job search. I asked about his work. There was warmth there, familiarity. Sarah was polite, not friendly exactly, more like someone hosting a guest she hadn't personally invited but couldn't openly resent without looking bad. She smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. She'd say things like, "Of course, stay as long as you need," while tapping her nails against her phone like she couldn't wait for the conversation to end. I told myself I was imagining it because I wanted to believe this could be simple. I wanted to believe that family meant shelter, not debt. But even then, if I'm honest, there were little things. The way Sarah corrected Mark in front of people, the way she made decisions and announced them like they were facts, the way she'd lean against him at gatherings, not affectionately, but possessively, like she was reminding everyone he belonged to her. I first met Sarah 7 years ago when Mark brought her to a family dinner. She was bright, vivacious, the kind of woman who could make everyone laugh while still controlling the room. I remember watching Mark look at her like she was the sun, and I remember thinking, in a quiet corner of my mind, please don't let this burn him. But he was happy. He looked happy. And after losing our parents, I was terrified of losing anything else. So I swallowed my discomfort and called it protectiveness. 6 months into living there, Sarah stopped pretending. It started with subtle digs, so subtle I almost convinced myself I misheard them. "Still applying?" she'd ask, eyebrows raised. "Do you think you'll be here much longer?" said with a too light laugh. "I'm sure someone with your skills could find something if you really tried." Mark would be in the room sometimes, but he'd miss the tone, or pretend he did. He'd kiss the top of her head and say, "Babe, give her a break," like it was harmless teasing. But it wasn't harmless. It was measuring tape. Every comment was a way of shrinking me in my own skin, reminding me that this wasn't my home, that my presence was tolerated only as long as it didn't inconvenience her. So I tried harder. I cooked dinners, cleaned more than my share, paid for groceries when I could. I said thank you so often it started feeling like a prayer. And still, Sarah's behavior escalated. Mail accidentally thrown away. My shampoo mysteriously used up. Appointments missed because she must have moved that paper. Then came the first moment I couldn't ignore. A box of my clothes donated. Not random clothes, not old things I'd forgotten. A dress I wore to my college graduation. A sweater that belonged to our mother. I remember holding that empty box, my hands shaking, feeling like something sacred had been violated. When I confronted Sarah, she widened her eyes and did that innocent voice. "Oh my gosh, I thought they were donation clothes." But the look in her eyes didn't match the apology. It was the look of someone testing boundaries. And when I went to Mark, my Mark, the brother who used to defend me without hesitation, he sighed like I was creating drama. She didn't mean it. Sarah just doesn't think sometimes. "Can you not make this a big thing?" The sentence that stuck in my throat wasn't anger. It was fear. Because if my brother couldn't see it, then what was happening to him when I wasn't watching? I started noticing more once my eyes were open. Sarah controlling their money. Mark getting an allowance like a teenager. Sarah checking his phone and accusing him if he spoke to a female coworker. And Mark, slowly, quietly, becoming someone who asked for permission with his eyes. Still, I stayed, because he was all I had left. And I told myself, if I just keep the peace, if I just don't push, we'll get through this. Then I started saving money for one thing that would finally let me stand on my own. A laptop. A fresh start. I kept the cash in an envelope, hidden in my dresser drawer like it was the last proof I still had control over my own life. And one day I came home, and it was gone. I knew something was wrong the second I opened my dresser drawer. It wasn't dramatic. No empty space screaming at me. Just a subtle wrongness, like when you walk into a room and feel the air has shifted. I reached in, fingers brushing the back corner where I always kept it. Nothing. I pulled the drawer out farther, checked beneath folded shirts, under socks, behind sweaters I hadn't worn in months. My chest tightened. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing shallow, telling myself not to panic. You probably moved it, I thought. You were reorganizing last week. You're tired. But I wasn't careless with that envelope. That envelope was my exit plan. I'd been saving for months. Every freelance payment, every odd job, every dollar I could spare. I skipped meals, walked instead of taking ride shares, said no to things I wanted because that laptop meant independence. It meant not needing their roof. It meant dignity. I searched the room again, slower this time, methodical. Checked my backpack, my suitcase, even the bathroom cabinet, even though I knew that made no sense. Still nothing. That's when I walked into the living room and saw it, sitting on the coffee table like it belonged there. A brand new designer purse, sleek, structured, unmistakably expensive. The kind Sarah had pointed out in store windows before, sighing about how someday she might treat herself. My stomach dropped. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming softly, scrolling through her phone like the world was exactly as it should be. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. "Did you happen to see an envelope in my room?" She didn't look up right away. "What kind of envelope?" she asked casually. "White, cash inside." She finally turned, blinking. "No, why?" My hands curled into fists at my sides. "Because it's gone." She shrugged, actually shrugged. "I haven't been in your room." I nodded slowly, too slowly. My eyes drifted back to the purse. "That's new," I said. Her smile tightened just a fraction. "Oh, this? Yeah, I picked it up yesterday." "With what money?" I asked. Silence. Not long, just long enough. Her shoulders dropped, like she was tired of pretending. "I used some of it." "Some?" My vision blurred. "You took my money." She crossed her arms. "I didn't take it. I figured it was fair." "Fair?" My voice cracked despite myself. "That was my savings." She exhaled sharply, like I was exhausting her. "You've been living here for 3 years, Victoria, rent-free, eating our food, using utilities. I think you owe us." The word owe landed like a slap. I felt something tear open in my chest. "You didn't ask. You didn't say anything. You just went into my room and—" "Mark said it was fine," she cut in. That stopped me cold. I turned on my heel and went to the door, keys shaking in my hand as I left. I didn't trust myself to stay until Mark got home. I needed air, space, time before I said something I couldn't take back. When Mark walked in later that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the empty envelope in front of me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just told him exactly what happened. Every word. He listened, jaw tight, eyes flicking once towards Sarah. Then he said the words I still hear in my sleep. "She shouldn't have taken it," he said slowly. "But you shouldn't have kept that much cash lying around." I stared at him. "Are you serious?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Vic, we've done a lot for you. Sarah was just trying to—" "She stole from me," I said, my voice shaking now. "That was my way out." "You're being ungrateful," he snapped. That was it. That was the moment something fundamental broke. I looked at my brother, the man who had held my hand at our parents' funeral, who promised he'd never abandon me, and realized he was choosing her version of reality over mine. I stood up. "I'm leaving," I said. Mark looked startled. "Don't be dramatic." But I was already walking away. I packed that night. Fast. Silent. My hands moved on autopilot while my heart felt like it was collapsing in on itself. As I zipped my bag, I kept thinking, if he can justify this, what else has he been justifying for years? I didn't know yet. But a year later, when my phone rang in the middle of the night, I would. Hospitals have a smell you never forget. Bleach, antiseptic, something metallic underneath it all, like fear soaked into tile. I pushed through the automatic doors just after 3 o'clock a.m., my chest tight, my thoughts racing faster than my feet. The fluorescent lights were too bright, too unforgiving. Everything felt exposed. I spotted Mark before he saw me. He was sitting alone in a plastic chair near the wall, shoulders slumped, hands clasped together like he was praying or trying not to fall apart. One eye was already swelling shut, dark purple spreading beneath it. Yellowing bruises bloomed along his forearms, old ones layered under fresh. My stomach dropped. I crossed the room in a few steps, crouched in front of him without thinking. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Mark." He looked up, and when he saw me, his face crumpled. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding back until that moment, until my big brother broke down in front of me, crying like a child who finally couldn't pretend anymore. "I'm sorry," he said over and over. "I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have protected you." I pulled him into my arms, feeling how thin he'd become, how tense his body was, even while leaning into me. His shoulders shook against mine. A nurse approached gently, explaining his injuries. Nothing life-threatening, bruising, a cut that needed stitches. Observation. "She threw a vase," Mark said quietly once we were alone again. I moved just in time. The words didn't register at first. "She what?" He stared at the floor. We were arguing. About money. About you. About everything. "She said if I ever left her, she'd ruin me." Then she grabbed the vase. My hands started shaking. "And you called the police?" I asked. He nodded. "I didn't know what else to do. She threatened to hurt herself if I tried to leave. I thought someone was going to die." The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. As the hours crawled by, pieces fell into place. Ugly, painful pieces that suddenly made everything make sense. The isolation, the financial control, the way he flinched when voices got raised, the excuses, the cancellations, the shrinking. "She's been hitting you," I said finally. He didn't argue. "It started small," he murmured. A shove, a slap, then apologies, promises. I thought I could fix it. My throat burned. For how long? Years. I closed my eyes. That envelope, that purse, his silence. He hadn't sided with her because he didn't care. He'd sided with her because he was trapped. I knew it was wrong when she took your money, he said, voice cracking again. But I was scared. If I went against her, I didn't know what she'd do. Anger surged through me, hot, fierce, protective, but it wasn't aimed at him anymore. It was aimed at the woman who had hollowed him out. Later that morning, a police officer came by to take a statement. Sarah had been arrested. A restraining order was being put in place. When Mark signed the papers, his hands shook so badly he could barely hold the pen. I squeezed his shoulder. You did the right thing. He looked at me, eyes red, exhausted. I don't know who I am without her. The words gutted me. I helped him gather his things from the house later that day, what little he was allowed to take. We didn't talk much. The house felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. That night, Mark slept on my couch. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what would happen behind closed doors. But I was terrified of what came next, because leaving was only the beginning, and healing was going to cost us both. The first night Mark slept on my couch, neither of us really slept. I lay in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building settling. Every small sound made my heart jump. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying the same images on a loop. His bruised face under hospital lights, the way his hands shook when he signed the paperwork, the empty look in his eyes when he said he didn't know who he was without her. I kept thinking, how did I miss this? That question followed me into the morning. When I came out of my room, Mark was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked smaller in daylight, fragile in a way that scared me more than the bruises had. Did you sleep at all? I asked softly. He shook his head. We sat there in silence for a while, the kind that presses down on your chest. Finally, he spoke. You were right, he said, about everything. The words landed heavy. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt justified. Instead, my throat tightened. I didn't want to be right, I said. I just wanted my brother back. He flinched at that, like I'd struck something raw. Over the next few days, reality settled in. Slow, unavoidable, and overwhelming. Mark filed for divorce. He got a restraining order. He started making lists of debts he didn't even know existed. Credit cards maxed out in his name. Loans he never agreed to. A second mortgage he'd somehow signed without fully understanding what it meant because she'd told him it was just paperwork. I watched him sit at my table, head in his hands, staring at numbers that didn't feel real. She said it was all under control, he muttered once. She said I worried too much. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Because I knew that tone, that dismissal, that quiet erosion of confidence. It was the same tone Sarah had used on me when she told me I owed them. When she made me feel small in a house that wasn't supposed to be a battlefield. One evening after dinner, Mark finally said the thing I knew he'd been circling. I should have stopped her when she took your money. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man drowning in shame. You couldn't, I said carefully. Not then. You weren't free. He shook his head. That doesn't make it okay. No, I agreed. It doesn't, but it explains it. That was the hardest part, holding two truths at once, that he had hurt me deeply, and that he had been surviving something I didn't fully understand at the time. There were moments when anger flared up anyway, sharp and sudden, like when he apologized for the 5th time in one day, voice trembling, asking if I hated him now, or when he confessed that sometimes, even after everything, he still worried about her. Wondered if she was okay. Felt guilty for calling the police. I snapped once. She stole from me. She hit you. She almost killed you. He stared at me, eyes wide, then looked down. I know, my brain hasn't caught up yet. Later, I apologized for my tone, because I'd started reading, learning, about trauma bonds, about abuse cycles, about how leaving doesn't magically erase years of conditioning. At night, after Mark went to bed, I'd sit on my couch scrolling through articles, forums, support resources, trying to understand how someone as kind and intelligent as my brother had ended up so completely erased. And the answer was always the same. It happened slowly. I thought back to myself, how long it took me to realize Sarah was intentionally hurting me, how long I made excuses, how long I stayed quiet to keep the peace. The difference was that Mark hadn't just been manipulated. He'd been afraid. One night, about a week after he moved in, we sat on the balcony wrapped in blankets, the city humming below us. She used to tell me no one else would put up with me, he said quietly, that I was lucky she loved me. My chest ached. She told me you were jealous, he added, that you were trying to undermine our marriage. I didn't want to believe that, but it was easier than believing she was hurting you on purpose. I closed my eyes. I should have fought harder, he whispered. So should I admitted. I should have trusted my instincts sooner. About her, about all of it. We sat there a long time, not fixing anything, just letting the truth breathe between us. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't just about Sarah. It was about what happens when love turns into control, when silence feels safer than honesty, when people choose comfort over confrontation until the cost becomes unbearable. Mark started therapy the following week. I started going too, separately, for my own reasons. Because forgiving him didn't erase what I'd lost. Because being strong for someone else doesn't mean you don't need help yourself. Some days were good. Some days were heavy. Some days Mark laughed like his old self, and it felt like a small miracle. Other days he barely spoke. But we were moving, slowly, forward. And I knew deep down that the hardest part was still ahead. Because healing doesn't end when the danger is gone. Sometimes that's when it really begins. If healing were a straight line, this part wouldn't exist. But it isn't. It's a spiral, forward motion tangled with setbacks, progress knotted to fear. About 2 weeks after Mark moved in with me, the outside world started pressing in. It began with a phone call. Mark was in the shower when his phone buzzed on the counter. I wasn't snooping. I was making dinner, but the screen lit up with a name that made my stomach clench. Sarah's mother. I didn't answer it. I didn't touch the phone. I just stared at it while it rang itself out, the vibration humming like a warning. When Mark came out, towel around his waist, hair dripping onto his shoulders, I told him. His face drained of color. She must have found out, he said. Found out meant arrested. Found out meant restraining order. Found out meant Mark finally stopped covering for her. That night, the messages started. Not directly to me, to him. Voicemails filled with crying, with rage, with blame. 1 minute, Sarah was the victim, misunderstood, pushed too far, abandoned by the man who promised forever. The next, she was furious, accusing him of betrayal, of ruining her life, of conspiring against her with me. I listened from the hallway as Mark replayed one message, his shoulders hunched. You're just like your sister. Sarah's voice sneered through the speaker. You let her poison you against me. He shut the phone off, hands shaking. That's what she always said, he whispered. That you were the problem. Something cold settled in my chest. I'd known Sarah resented me. I hadn't known how deeply she'd weaponized that resentment. Over the next few days, Mark started getting calls from friends he hadn't heard from in years. Awkward check-ins, vague concern, carefully neutral questions. Hey man, just wanted to see how you're doing. He told me later that Sarah had reached out to some of them, spinning a story about a mental health crisis, about me manipulating him while he was vulnerable, about her being the real victim. The same pattern. Control the narrative. Isolate the target. Undermine their support. I watched Mark spiral as the weight of it pressed down. One evening, he sat on the edge of my couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. What if they believe her? He asked quietly. I sat beside him. Some might. He looked up, eyes glossy. What if I really am the problem? My heart broke all over again. That's the abuse talking, I said gently. Not you. But I could tell. Logic wasn't sticking yet. Around that time, Tom, Mark's old college friend, called me. We'd never been close, but his voice was tight with concern. I don't know if this is my place, he said, but I think you should know. I saw bruises on Mark months ago. The words knocked the air out of my lungs. He said it was from home repairs, Tom continued. I didn't believe him. I tried to talk to him about it. He shut me down. Then he stopped answering my calls. After I hung up, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I slid down the wall and cried until my chest hurt. Because suddenly I wasn't just dealing with what had happened. I was grieving what should have happened. All the times someone noticed and didn't push harder. All the moments I stayed quiet to keep the peace. All the years Mark lived in fear while I told myself it wasn't my place. That guilt is a quiet, corrosive thing. It doesn't scream, it whispers. Around the same time, Mark confessed something that made my blood run cold. She convinced me to quit my job, he said one night. I stared at him. Your job? The firm? He nodded. She didn't like me working with women, said it was disrespectful, said if I loved her, I'd choose her over a paycheck. That job had been his dream. A decade of work, a path toward partnership. Gone. Replaced by a work-from-home opportunity she'd found. Low-paying, unstable, entirely under her control. I felt sick. She needed you dependent, I said. He swallowed hard. I see that now. The escalation wasn't loud. It was relentless. Legal paperwork piling up, financial reality crashing down, old friends resurfacing with pieces of truth that filled in the gaps like broken glass. And through it all, Sarah's voice lingered. Through messages, through memory, through the doubts she'd planted so carefully over years. Some nights, Mark woke up gasping, convinced he'd heard her in the apartment. Some mornings, he couldn't get out of bed. I watched him struggle with the paradox that haunts so many survivors. He was finally safe. And yet, he had never felt more exposed. That's when I realized this wasn't just about escaping abuse. It was about rebuilding identity from scratch. And neither of us knew how long that would take. The worst night didn't come with sirens or shouting. It came quietly. Mark had been having a better week. Or at least, that's what I told myself. He'd gone to therapy twice. He'd laughed at something dumb on TV. He even talked about maybe reaching out to his old boss someday, just to see. So when I came home from work one evening and found the apartment dark, I didn't panic at first. I set my keys down, called his name. Nothing. Then I noticed his shoes were still by the door. His phone was on the kitchen counter, screen dark. A strange cold settled in my chest. I walked toward the bathroom, my footsteps slow, careful, like my body already knew what my mind didn't want to say out loud. The door was closed. Locked. Mark, I knocked. Hey, you okay? No answer. I knocked harder. Mark. Still nothing. My hands started to shake. Mark, open the door. Silence. I pressed my forehead against the wood, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Please, I whispered. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. Then, finally, the lock clicked. The door opened just enough for me to see him sitting on the floor, back against the tub, knees pulled to his chest. His eyes were red, not from crying, from holding it in. I can't do this, he said quietly. I ruined everything. I dropped to the floor in front of him without thinking. You didn't, I said, reaching for his hands. She did. He shook his head violently. I let it happen. I pushed you away. I defended her. I chose her over you, over myself. The self-loathing in his voice scared me more than anger ever could. I'm 35, he continued, voice cracking. I have nothing, no job, no marriage, a mountain of debt. I don't even know who I am anymore. I felt tears spill down my face, hot and uncontrollable. You're my brother, I said. You're alive. That matters. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something frightening there. Not hopelessness, conviction. I don't want to wake up like this anymore, he whispered. My heart stopped. I grabbed his face gently, forcing him to meet my eyes. You don't get to leave, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Not after everything. Not when you finally escaped. He broke then. Fully. Sobs racked his body, his forehead collapsing against my shoulder as he cried like someone grieving their own life. I held him for a long time, long enough for the panic to settle, long enough for his breathing to slow. Later that night, after he fell asleep on the couch, I sat in the dark living room, knees pulled up to my chest, staring at nothing. I realized something terrifying. I'd thought the danger was over when Sarah was arrested, but abuse doesn't end when the abuser leaves. Sometimes it leaves a person hollowed out, convinced they're the problem, that they deserve the wreckage. And I didn't know if love alone would be enough to fill that space. The next morning, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not heroic. A practical one. I called a crisis support line. I asked what to watch for. I asked how to help without smothering. I asked how to keep someone alive when they're drowning in shame. They told me something that stuck. You can't heal someone for them, but you can walk beside them while they learn how. So I started doing that. I checked in without interrogating. I listened without fixing. I made space for silence. And slowly, Mark started talking again. About the fear, about the guilt, about how he still loved her sometimes and hated himself for it. I didn't flinch. Because love, real love, doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence. That night in the bathroom was the lowest point, the place where I truly thought I might lose him. And maybe, just maybe, that's why what came next mattered so much. The turning point didn't come with fireworks. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, quiet and unremarkable, when Mark was sitting at the kitchen table staring at his laptop like it might bite him. I think I want to call my old boss, he said. I looked up from the sink, water still running over my hands. For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard him right. Are you sure? I asked carefully. He nodded, jaw tight. Not to beg, just to explain, to stop hiding. That mattered. I could hear the difference. This wasn't desperation, this was agency. He made the call with his hand shaking, voice unsteady at first. I stayed in the other room, giving him privacy, but not distance. I could hear pieces of the conversation, awkward pauses, careful honesty, a long silence that made my stomach knot. Then his tone changed, softer, surprised. When he hung up, he sat there for a long moment, phone still in his hand. He said the door isn't closed, Mark finally said, that he wondered what happened to me. Tears filled his eyes. But this time they weren't drowning tears. They were release. That evening, he did something else that surprised me. He opened a new bank account, in his name only. He contacted a financial advisor recommended through a domestic abuse support group. He scheduled an appointment with a lawyer to go over the debts Sarah had hidden. Each step was small. Each step was terrifying. And each step pulled him a little further out of the fog. The real moment, the one that changed everything, came a few days later. Mark got a voicemail from Sarah. Not angry, not manipulative, soft, apologetic. She said she missed him, that she was getting help, that she couldn't live without him, that she didn't know who she was without him. I watched Mark listen to the message, his face unreadable. When it ended, he sat in silence. I didn't say anything. Finally, he deleted it. Just like that. I can't save her, he said quietly, and I don't want to destroy myself trying. Something inside my chest loosened. That night, we talked about our parents, about what they would have said if they could see us now. I think Dad would tell me to stop confusing endurance with strength, Mark said. I smiled through tears, and Mom would remind you that love doesn't make you afraid. A week later, Mark apologized again, for the money, for believing Sarah over me, for the years of silence. But this time I didn't hear desperation in it. I heard accountability. I don't expect forgiveness to erase anything, he said, but I want to earn it. That was the first time I truly believed him, because he wasn't asking me to make it better. He was making it better himself. For the first time in a long time, I felt something that had been missing for years. Hope, not the loud kind. The quiet, stubborn kind that shows up when someone finally chooses truth over comfort. Fallout doesn't always explode. Sometimes it settles, heavy, unavoidable, and permanent. Once Mark stopped responding to Sarah, the noise changed. The messages didn't stop right away, but they lost their power. Her words no longer dictated his mood, no longer pulled him back into the cycle. He let the lawyer handle communication. He let the system do what it was supposed to do. And for the first time, he didn't clean up after her. The legal consequences came first. Sarah was charged with domestic violence. Seeing her name on official paperwork felt surreal, like proof that the things Mark endured weren't just relationship problems or misunderstandings, but crimes. The restraining order was extended. Court dates were scheduled. Statements were recorded. Mark gave his calmly. Not defensively, not apologetically, just truthfully. That alone felt like a revolution. Then came the financial reckoning. The full scope of the damage unfolded slowly. Credit reports, loan documents, debt notices stacked on the table like evidence of a life hijacked. Gambling charges, cash advances, accounts Mark had never opened but somehow carried his name. I watched him absorb it all, shoulders tense but posture different than before. I'll deal with it, he said. One thing at a time. And he did. The fallout spread outward. Friends Sarah had isolated Mark from started reaching out again. Quiet messages at first, then longer conversations. Apologies came, awkwardness too, but also relief, validation. I always thought something was off, one friend admitted. I didn't know how to help, said another. Mark didn't blame them. He didn't have the energy for bitterness anymore. As for Sarah, her control evaporated when the narrative slipped out of her hands. She lost allies fast once the truth became undeniable. The charm didn't land the same when paired with police reports and medical photos. People stopped excusing, stopped explaining, stopped showing up. The silence around her grew loud. One afternoon, Mark came home from a meeting with his lawyer and sat down heavily on the couch. She tried to blame you again, he said. I didn't react right away. What did you say? I asked. I told them the truth, he replied. That she stole from you, that she hurt you too, that I failed to protect you, and I own that. My chest tightened, not with pain this time, but something close to pride. That was the fallout I didn't expect. Not revenge, not humiliation, just truth standing on its own, no longer needing my voice to survive. Slowly, Mark started rebuilding. He reconnected with his old firm. Nothing official yet, but conversations were happening. He went to therapy weekly. He started walking taller, literally. His shoulders weren't hunched anymore. His laugh came easier. Some days were still hard. Triggers didn't disappear overnight, A raised voice on TV could still make him flinch. Financial stress still woke him up at night. But the difference was this: he didn't run from it. He faced it. And I faced something too. I let myself feel the anger I'd buried for years, the grief over losing our parents, and almost losing my brother, the betrayal that had nearly hardened me into someone I didn't want to be. One evening, Mark turned to me and said, "I don't think I would have survived this without you." I shook my head. "You survived because you chose to." But we both knew the truth lived somewhere in the middle. The fallout wasn't clean, but it was honest. And honesty, I learned, is a kind of freedom. A year ago, I thought leaving my brother's house meant losing my family. I was wrong. It meant losing an illusion. Mark lives with me now, not because he's broken, but because rebuilding doesn't have to be done alone. Some mornings, I hear him in the kitchen before I wake up, humming quietly while he makes coffee. It's a small sound, but it still catches me off guard. For so long, silence in the morning meant tension, fear, waiting for something to explode. Now it just means peace. He's in therapy. He's working with a financial advisor. He's talking seriously with his old firm about returning in a reduced role while he regains his footing. He has good days and bad days, but they no longer define him. He's becoming himself again. Sometimes we sit on the couch going through old photo albums, pictures of us with our parents, sunburned and smiling on a beach vacation years ago. One night, Mark stared at a photo for a long time and said, "I think they'd be proud of us." I think so too. As for me, I've learned things I wish I hadn't needed to learn. That family loyalty should never require self-erasure. That silence can look like peace until it costs you everything. That abuse doesn't always leave visible marks. And when it does, it's often far too late. I've also learned this. You are allowed to leave, even when leaving feels like betrayal. You are allowed to protect yourself, even when the person hurting you shares your last name. And you are allowed to forgive someone without forgetting what it cost. Mark and I aren't the same people we were before all of this. We're more cautious, more aware, but also stronger, in a quieter way. We ask questions now. We check in. We don't assume love means endurance. If someone watching this story is living in a situation that feels wrong, but not wrong enough to justify leaving, I want you to hear this clearly. If you feel small, if you feel afraid to speak, if you're constantly apologizing just to keep the peace, that's already too much. One stolen envelope turned into a revelation. One late-night phone call turned into survival. One hard decision opened the door to everything that followed. There's no neat ending here. Just two siblings rebuilding something real out of the wreckage. And for the first time in a long time, I believe that's enough.